Because as my mother, who's here today, taught me, when you get knocked down, you get up and you keep on going. If you believe in what you're doing, you march forward.
Pierre Poilievre is marching back to Parliament Hill, victorious in an Alberta by-election. But where will his path ultimately lead him? I'm Kate McKenna, sitting in for Catherine Cullen, and I cover the Conservative Party for CBC News. Here on the House, we often examine the Liberals because they're the party in power and have been for 10 years. So this week, we turn to the Conservatives and conservatism. Because as Pierre Poilievre steps back into the role of leader of the official opposition, some Conservatives worry the party has challenges ahead.
I just think it's hard for the Conservatives to push their ceiling up high enough that they can compete in what amounts to a two-party race.
I don't think there's any point pretending it's not going to be a challenge. Pierre got the highest share of the vote a Conservative Party has gotten federally since Brian Mulroney. It's also true that Mark Carney got the highest share of the vote the Liberal Party has got since Pierre Trudeau.
Will Pierre Poilievre be the next Prime Minister of Canada? Party insiders are here with a frank assessment. This special edition of The House is now in session.
Whenever hardship strikes, you need to stand up and keep on going. And if you care about something, you don't give up on it when things get difficult or you suffer a setback. These stories that were on the faces of the people I met, the woman suffering from cancer who had just overcome days of radiation treatment, who showed up at my town hall in Stettler to tell me to keep going. I say to her, you don't give up, so I don't give up.
On Monday night, Pierre Poilievre reflected on the people who kept him going as he fought for a seat. His win was convincing. It was in a seat considered safe for the Conservatives, but he still took over 80% of the vote, even with more than 200 people running in the riding as part of an electoral reform protest. It's vindication for the Conservative leader who had been snubbed in his longtime Ottawa area riding in the April election. The 2025 federal election marked the fourth consecutive Conservative loss under four different leaders, starting with Stephen Harper in 2015, Andrew Scheer in 2019, Erin O'Toole in 2021, and Pierre Poilievre in April.
Well, tonight's result is certainly not the one we had hoped for. The people are never wrong.
And now we are heading back to Ottawa with a much bigger team, with more support from coast to coast, and with an endorsement from the Canadian people that we are the government in waiting.
We must continue this journey to welcoming more Canadians to take another look at our party.
We are cognizant of the fact that we didn't quite get over the finish line yet. We know that change is needed, but change is hard to come by.
And this fourth loss for the party has led to soul-searching for some lifelong Conservatives about conservatism.
It exists almost as a way of thinking about and seeing the world. I have a lot of the same shirts. I eat the same lunch most days. I'm just instinctively drawn to resisting change and drawn to the familiar. So
Sean Speer has been thinking about what it means to be a Conservative for a very long time. He's currently the editor-at-large of the right-leaning publication The Hub. Previously, he advised Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He's been reflecting on what's next for the party, specifically whether the collapse of the NDP means English Canada is ushering in the advent of a two-party system, and what that could mean for Conservatives.
One of the challenges that the Conservative Party faces is indeed structural, which is to say the Conservative Party has the highest floor of support of any of the major political parties. It has rarely fallen below 27, 28% of the popular vote. There's a critical mass of Canadians who are committed Conservative voters. The problem is the party's ceiling has been pretty low. So in some ways, the conundrum facing Conservative Party leaders is how they maintain the floor of support, the foundational support that the party has, while at the same time increasing its ceiling. And different party leaders have tried different approaches or strategies to do that. I think it's fair to say that Andrew Scheer was principally focused in the 2019 campaign on on sustaining the party's floor, and that came with an inability to raise the ceiling. Aaron O'Toole did the opposite. He was prepared to compromise the party's floor support in the name of raising the ceiling and reaching new and different voters. And of course, that came at the expense of bleeding support from the party's right flank to the People's Party of Canada. And so Pierre Poilievre in this last election was in effect trying to do both at the same time. I just think it's hard for the Conservatives to push their ceiling up high enough that they can compete in what amounts to a two-party race.
Is there any way that the Conservatives' fortunes are not directly tied to the NDP's fortunes?
Inside the Conservative Party as it's currently constructed, my judgment's no.
I understand that Pierre Poilievre has been asking supporters how he can get another million votes to essentially secure a victory. And in your view, where does that million votes come from?
I don't know. I'm not sure there are another million votes out there.
I put that rather difficult prognosis to the Conservatives' deputy leader, Melissa Lantsman, who says don't count them out yet. Pierre Poilievre is building a new coalition of voters, and things in politics can change quickly.
What I think our work as politicians and those in the Conservative Party comes down to is to build on that coalition. Parts of that coalition were never accessible to the Conservatives before. I think the mistake that people make in politics is believing that what is true today is going to be the situation tomorrow, and we know that's very much not true.
A couple of years ago, before I ended up working for Pierre, I wrote a piece where I kind of described this I'll call it like the gatekeepers coalition, the anti-gatekeepers coalition. And the premise of it was that there's a lot of people in this country that are hurt by entrenched powers and interests that hold them back.
Ben Woodfinden's politics are inspired by his British working-class roots. He came to Canada as a teenager, and in 2022 he became Pierre Poilievre's Director of Communications, a position that he held until the spring election. He's also kind of a political philosopher, currently working on his PhD at McGill. And he explains how the Canadian coalition of Conservative voters he helped build is different from what's happening in other Western countries.
The term left behind has been, you've heard that in the US to refer to kind of like these Rust Belt voters. You've heard it in the UK to describe kind of, working class Brexit voters. But I think what's a bit different about the coalition that we built here that was kind of, I'll call it broadly like a left behind coalition, but the difference is here, the working class component of it was just one part of it. We did very well with young voters, and housing was obviously a big reason for that. And we did very well among a more kind of ethnically diverse set of voters as well, right? And I'm going to call that the Poilievre coalition, but the Poilievre coalition it's younger than previous Conservative coalitions. It's much more working class, and it's much more ethnically diverse. And I think that's very much kind of the future of this country, like not just Conservative politics.
So obviously the result in this election was not what you guys would have hoped for. Do you think that this coalition can continue into the next election?
I do. Look, I don't think there's any point pretending it's not going to be a challenge. Pierre got the highest share of the vote a Conservative Party has gotten federally since Brian Mulroney, and that's true. We shouldn't ignore that, but it's also true that Mark Carney got the highest share of the vote the Liberal Party has got since Pierre Trudeau. I think we got 41.3% of the vote. In any other election, that would have been enough in a three-party system, but it was a two-party race in this election, and I think there's a very good chance that it could be a two-party race going forward. Broadly speaking, the coalition, the Poilievre coalition, is a coalition that wants change. And I actually think Pierre is well positioned to be a kind of an agent of change because he's a fighter, and that he's actually the kind of guy that's willing to take on these powerful, entrenched interests that don't want change, that want to preserve the status quo. So, look, is it going to be a challenge to keep that coalition together? Yes, because it's a big, getting the 8 or so million votes we got. There's going to be a lot of different opinions of what those people think in that coalition, and that's always a challenge. It's not just winning voters, but keeping them.
The vast majority of Conservative voters say, well, we think we should stay the course. But about 1 in 5 actually think that the party should move more to the right. Only about 7% thought that the party needed to move more to the left or the center.
Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Her latest poll finds potential trouble on the horizon when it comes to party unity.
it's telling that you've got about 1 in 5 Conservative voters who want to see the party actually go even further to the right. I think that is going to present a challenge for Pierre Poilievre as he tries to keep the more fiscal or business-minded or small government-minded side of the party in one place. And that does, by the way, represent sort of the majority of that Conservative base. But 1 in 5 is a pretty significant number.
Halifax West is a very diverse riding. It's urban, it's suburban, and it's rural. So for your listeners, think everything from Peggy's Cove and fishing communities like
Rob Batherson is a longtime Nova Scotia Conservative and former party president. He identifies as both a provincial progressive Conservative and he ran federally in Halifax West last spring.
There was a stampede of NDP voters that went Liberal, and that was a big barrier for me and our team.
A new Angus Reid poll says that 1 in 5 Conservatives would like to see the party move farther to the right. And I'm just wondering, what effect would that have out east if the party moved farther to the right?
Well, we won't win. You know, Conservatives succeed, and we've seen that under Stephen Harper. We've seen that under Brian Mulroney. We've seen that under John Diefenbaker. And we're actually seeing that to a degree under Pierre Poilievre. We succeed when we reach more voters.
Despite losing his race, Batherson says there's evidence that people in his area are open to voting for Nova Scotia's brand of conservatism.
We saw that in Nova Scotia in the 2024 provincial election, where Tim Houston's Progressive Conservatives won 53% of the vote and won provincial seats that fall within the federal riding of Halifax West. So there is an accessible vote pool of voters of all sorts of demographics who are prepared to vote for a Conservative option.
This is the conundrum for the Conservative Party. While they've struggled electorally, their provincial cousins have found success. Right now, 6 of the 10 provinces are led by right-leaning parties. Part of the answer may be that conservatism is a little bit different across the country. In Atlantic Canada, like in Ontario, the provincial parties are called the Progressive Conservatives. That name hasn't been used federally for more than 20 years.
What works in Alberta and what works in Montreal is not the same thing that what works in downtown Moncton. So hence the reason why I think we have to look at it more on a regional basis sometimes. For myself, decentralization is important for me. You know, I think in the Mulroney years, we had decentralization and it worked. So I think we have to come back to some regional policies and it works.
Danielle Alain was a cabinet minister in New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs's cabinet, but broke with the former premier over a policy mandating parental consent for students who wanted to use different pronouns at school. Now he's eyeing the leader's job.
I hope to make an announcement this fall. As we all know, the PC Party of New Brunswick is going through a leadership process. So I hope to make final decisions with talking to New Brunswickers, talking to our members of the PC Party of New Brunswick, and my family. So we'll see what goes on this fall.
Well, would you like to make that announcement now? It sounds like you're in.
No, I'm not there yet.
If he decides to go for the top job, it's clear he thinks Conservatives, at least in New Brunswick, need to get back to basics.
We got to pivot back to what's important. You know, it's security, economic stewardship. We've got to tone down the rhetoric sometimes. Let's be socially progressive and fiscally conservative.
When it comes to winning elections, Quebec has been a bit of a recent roadblock. Pierre Poilievre is fluent in French, more so than his predecessors, and he visited Quebec often. But his party only won 11 seats out of 78.
Unless we as Conservatives decide to take Quebec political strategy more seriously and say we want to win another 10 to 15 to 20 seats in Quebec, maybe we will form government, but it's going to be very hard to form a majority government.
Dimitri Soudaz is a Quebecer, and he served as Director of Communications under Stephen Harper. He points out federal Conservative majorities in Canada have been few and far between. Over the past 50 years, there have only been 3. 2 under Brian Mulroney and 1 under Stephen Harper, when the NDP were at the height of the Orange Wave. Soudaz argues the Conservatives need to find star candidates to sell the party in Quebec, and says it was a strategic error to not bring on people like Quebec Finance Minister Éric Girard. Girard wanted to run in the last election, but the Poilievre Conservatives weren't interested.
When is the last time that Quebecers played a real influential role within the Conservative Party and within a Conservative government? 1992, under Brian Mulroney. So the real challenge here is the following. Since the founding of the new Conservative Party, there have been two leaders from the prairies, Prime Minister Harper and Andrew Scheer, and there have been two leaders from Ontario, Erin O'Toole and Pierre Poilievre. So one of the considerations, when time comes, leaders change eventually, they're not there forever, is should the Conservative Party elect a leader that is from Quebec?
Do you think it's a matter of Quebecers not seeing themselves in the Conservative Party?
Well, our country is made up of two founding nations, the English and the French. So why is it important in Quebec to have high-profile, well-known, respected Quebecers be a part of your team? Because when you are a leader of a party that is not from Quebec, those high-profile, well-known, well-respected individuals who join your team give you the seal of approval. It sends a message to Quebecers that we are joining this team, therefore you can trust this team. The reality is a leader from Quebec would have to do the same thing in English Canada. It's that additional validation of people from our part of the country that are known, liked, respected, and trusted that provide that additional seal of approval. Now, there's a lot more work. Again, we're talking tactics right now. And in order to achieve any objective, you cannot just be tactical. You need to have a strategy. And I repeat myself, if from the outset the strategy is we are happy with the 10 seats that we have, we will figure out a path to victory by winning in the rest of the country and only having 10 out of 78 seats, then that cannot lead to a majority Conservative government.
I'm Kate McKenna, and you're listening to a special episode of The House from CBC Radio, focusing on the fortunes of the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada. Looking across the country at the different provincial Conservative governments, the one that has to tantalize federal Conservatives most is the success of Doug Ford in Ontario. In February this year, he won a third consecutive majority. But some reports hint at a frosty relationship between Ford and Poilievre. For example, it took Poilievre weeks to congratulate Ford on his victory, and the Ontario Premier said he wanted to stay out of the federal election. He didn't endorse his Conservative cousin. In fact, Ford seems to have a budding friendship with Prime Minister Mark Carney, even inviting him to his Muskoka cottage last month. But feuding aside, the question has to be, why do you think some progressive Conservative premiers like Doug Ford and Tim Houston are having electoral success when, over the last 4 elections, the CPC hasn't had that same success?
It's a great question, isn't it? I would love to see analysis, Kate, of the Ford-Carney switchers. That is to say, in the last federal election, there were people who had voted consistently for Doug Ford in his 3 majority elections, but didn't vote for the Conservatives in 2025. I don't quite understand who those people are, but if I was advising the federal Conservative Party, I would be spending a lot of time understanding what is standing in the way of them not merely voting Conservative at the provincial level, but also federally.
You know, the answer to this riddle for Conservatives is what Doug Ford has done 3 times now in sweeping the Metro Belt, the 905, the 40-some suburban exurban seats around Toronto. And that's where the Conservatives, since 2011, the Harper majority in 2011, have been having more difficulty at the federal level.
Few Conservatives in Canada understand the nuances of federal and provincial parties better than Jason Kenney. He is a former Alberta Premier and a former Harper-era cabinet minister. He says Canada's Conservative Party can look to Ford for some lessons.
The style of Mr. Ford has been very pragmatic while maintaining a kind of populist style. And I think he really comes across credibly as a champion of regular working families. I think that's broadly consistent with the kind of position that Mr. Poilievre takes. So I think there's more to learn from there. I do think that where the Conservatives fell short was amongst older voters, people over the age of 55 or 60, and suburban women. And I think some of that may have been a perception that the Conservatives were perennially angry.
Melissa Lantzman, like Jason Kenney, understands how politics work. She worries the public doesn't understand why Pierre Poilievre is such an attack dog.
I think opposition to many Canadians that want to see their politicians working together rubs people the wrong way. But I think it's a very, very important function in democracy. And despite the fact that it makes people feel uncomfortable, I think Pierre is one of the most successful opposition leaders in the country's history. And that has been shown by the very fact that the issues that he's chosen and the issues that the party has chosen to go after have effectively been undone by the Liberals. They're running with conservative ideas going forward. So that function is very important, and I don't think it's one of tone. I think it's that people are uncomfortable with the idea of opposition, and whether they're uncomfortable or not, I think there is an important function. We're going to continue to do that.
But while Jason Kenney agrees with Lantzman that Poilievre is the greatest opposition leader since the Second World War, he does believe the tone he struck wasn't always right. One example, Poilievre came out as a critic of Bay Street and top business leadership. Last September, he called the CEO of Bell overpaid and said he empties the books to pay his wealthy friends.
He took a fairly adversarial approach to the leadership of the Canadian business community. And there's much to criticize there in terms of protected federally regulated industries, a kind of oligopoly in many Canadian industries. So I think there is room for totally legitimate criticism. I've often been critical of the approach taken by major Canadian industry organizations, but the tone became unnecessarily aggressive. One of the brands of any conservative party is that it is a voice for free enterprise. And I think, course correcting on that would be part of a broader reset for the federal Conservatives.
Do you think you can be both pro-business and pro-worker at the same time?
Yeah, look, Doug Ford is evidence of this. He's been working very closely with the union movement in Ontario, has gotten endorsements from most of the major private sector unions, and yet I think is still seen as being broadly pro-business. So it's possible to walk and chew gum at the same time.
I want to ask you about some new Angus Reid poll numbers that show that 1 in 5 Conservatives would like to see the party move farther to the right. We've seen that temptation to lean right and shore up the right flank to not lose support to parties like the PPC. And of course, you lost out in Alberta to the right flank of your own United Conservative Party in Alberta. So talk to me about the choices that you have to make in order to keep this tent together.
Yes, it has to be a coalition, and that means you've got to manage a coalition with very carefully. But I think you put your finger on something important here. I think that there may have been early on in Mr. Poilievre's leadership a little bit too much emphasis on reaching out to and trying to suppress the PPC vote, the Maxime Bernier vote, which was, let's say, radicalized during COVID. And so I think that for the vast majority of Canadians, the kind of people in Ontario who have voted for a Doug Ford majority 3 times, the perception that the federal Conservatives were on the side of law-breaking, of civil disobedience, of the convoy disruption, for example, was a serious brand problem. The Conservative Party is supposed to be the party of law and order. And that was put in doubt by the actions of some of the MPs, quite frankly, during February of 2022. So I think they need to be very careful about that. And I will say that there are a significant number of people very militant on the right of Canadian politics. I would call it on this sort of populist alt-right, who are far outside of the mainstream of Canadian politics, some of whom we're talking about a relatively small minority, I think probably less than 5% of the general population, who entertain all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories. Now, I think it's very important to police that. I think, by the way, the left needs to do that as well with their version of people are on the extremes. So I think similarly on the Canadian right, there needs to be a serious policing of any efforts to import those kinds of extreme views, which are far outside of the mainstream. Now, I think Pierre Poilievre is in the mainstream, and I don't think he took positions which were extreme, but he has to be very careful about the optics around that.
I'm wondering if you were advising him, what would you tell him in order to reach more women voters?
Well, I think, again, the tone, being an effective opposition leader does not require that you be angry all the time. And he's not. Unfortunately, the way, as Ralph Klein used to say, political journalists are fight promoters. And the opposition leader most often gets noticed when he's starting a fight. You got to watch that. I'll tell you, when I became opposition leader here in Alberta against Rachel Notley's NDP, I knew we were in a very good position with the new United Party to win, but I thought one of our potential huge liabilities was if I came out personally attacking Rachel Notley, being mean and hyper-aggressive, it would be poorly received. And so I banned heckling from our caucus in the legislature. I never criticized Premier Notley on a personal level. I actually praised her whenever I could. And I think, trying to find the right tone that projects that you're a strong leader, you're holding the government to account, you never need to be a jerk about it. And I think tone is critically important. I think featuring female MPs, and there are many competent ones in the Poilievre government, but I don't think it requires, quotes, moving to the left. Right now, believe it or not, the most popular party amongst female voters in the United Kingdom is Nigel Farage's Reform Party. Women who are concerned about community safety, about affordability, about cost of living, about economic security. So I don't think it means aping the positions of the left. I think a lot of it is about communicating.
The latest Angus Reid poll found that the majority of people who voted for Pierre Poilievre want him to stay on. But the majority of those who considered voting for him and then cast their ballot elsewhere want him to go. Shachi Curl says Poilievre's tone is popular with his base, but much less popular with potential Conservative voters.
He continues to struggle with likability. I think it's very telling and probably a little bit concerning that about half of Canadians say today that he's not a sincere person, or the same about half who say that Pierre Poilievre would be someone they would be ashamed to see as prime minister. So instead of making progress on that front, he's actually in a worse situation than where he was even, say, 2.5 years ago when he took over the leadership, where a lot of people weren't sure who Pierre Poilievre was and were trying to make up their minds. I see now that those opinions are a little bit more baked in.
Insiders say he's working to address this. Former Director of Communications Ben Woodfindon again.
I think it's undeniable that Pierre has a kind of an aggressive approach. I think it's probably a good way to put it. And, some people love it, some people don't like it, right? It turns some people off. And I suspect it probably does a lot of women. And I do think what you've already seen with Pierre is he's been softening his approach in the last few months. And there's a realization from Pierre and others that needs to happen. But I think a lot of the kind of coalition I've described as kind of the people that feel left behind, the people that feel like this country doesn't work for them, having trouble buying a house or settlement, and then the downstream impact that has on starting a family and that kind of stuff. That's just as true for men as it is for women. I think there's a broader kind of trend and shift going on in not just in Canadian politics, but just kind of Western politics more broadly, where increasingly men are shifting to parties of the right and women are shifting to parties of the left. And I personally think that's a very unhealthy social trend. I don't think it's a good idea for us to have a gender cleavage in politics, but I think these are broader trends that are happening beyond anything that Pierre's doing or anything that anyone else is doing.
Conservative writer Sean Spear says Poilievre has to learn to let some battles go.
One of the kind of modus operandi of the Conservatives generally, but particularly under Pierre Poilievre, has been a tendency to want to win every battle and to think about every day as a battle. And I think in the last Parliament, Conservatives could rightly argue that they won more of those battles than they lost. But at the end of the day, of course, it wasn't enough to win the the election or the war, if I can stick with the metaphor. I think the Conservatives need to kind of flip their understanding of politics in a way. The purpose isn't to win the battle each day. The truth is most Canadians aren't paying attention, and to the extent they are, they want their parliament to work and to function. And I think actually flipping the kind of script on the way they've thought about these things, focusing more on winning the war than winning the individual battles, I think would be to the benefit of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives.
Can I push you just a little bit on that? Like, do you think that is something that Pierre Poilievre can do? He's had this attack dog persona since he entered politics, more than 20 years ago. So do you think that he will be able to actually follow through on your advice?
It's a good question. I know Pierre Poilievre a bit, and I would say he's an extremely thoughtful guy. He knows his brief just about better than anyone else. And he is actually motivated by issues of compassion and opportunity and a kind of egalitarianism, if I can put it that way. I know it's not always self-evident in the way that he speaks and talks, but I remember, for instance, as a Harper era minister, him being really moved by the cancellation of a program that would have affected Canadians with intellectual disabilities, and he stepped in and had that decision reversed. So that's a long way of saying I do think it's in him. I concede that it is not typically how he's presented himself to the public. But, let's be blunt. He's only going to have one more kick at this can. And if he wants to be prime minister, and he self-evidently does, then I think he's going to have to make himself a bit vulnerable.
The question of Poilievre's leadership is going to linger for at least a few more months. He'll face a leadership review in January at the party's national convention. His caucus also adopted the Reform Act, giving them the ability to oust the leader if they so choose. Curl says Poilievre shouldn't take his job for granted.
Life in politics, Kate, we both know, particularly when you're at the head of a Conservative party, is pretty solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Andrew Scheer didn't get 2 chances. Erin O'Toole didn't get 2 chances. And I think there is now a question of whether Pierre Poilievre, within his own ranks, is going to be rewarded with a second chance.
Well, look, I think he has the support of Conservative caucus, so let's put that issue to bed. But we're excited to have him back in Parliament leading the party, and we're ready to get back to Parliament to continue the work that's been started. A lot of the issues that were present in the context of the election and in the context leading up to the election, whether it's the cost of living, whether it's young people not being able to find work or a job, whether it's the out-of-control housing prices, the inflationary pressures that are caused by the deficits and the debt incurred by the last 10 years of Liberal government. These are the issues that are still here.
As we saw in the by-election in Battle River Crowfoot, he didn't phone it in. He worked hard each and every day, he and his wife and his team.
So, Pierre Poilievre is back. But Canada's Conservative Party has long faced the same obstacle, a solid foothold in the West, but a steeper climb in Eastern Canada. Will Poilievre be able to overcome that next time? Former party president Rob Batherson thinks so.
The good news is, under Pierre Poilievre, we start from a very strong place because he's been proven right on a host of issues: cost of living, the carbon tax, housing, immigration, crime. And so we just need to be more vocal and clear and have more voices supporting Pierre's message so that people see their friends and neighbors and others in the Conservative cause speaking out on conservative solutions for the problems that we're facing today. I think we'll be unbeatable in the next election.
Now, after we made that documentary this week, Prime Minister Mark Carney came out and announced Canada would be dropping some retaliatory tariffs on the U.S.
There is a time in a game, in a big game, and this is a big game, when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up. The time in a game where you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. we happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now. I'd know. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game, and we're at that time of the game.
Shortly after, Pierre Poilievre came out to respond. So to break down that development and to talk about what to expect when Poilievre meets Carney for the first time face-to-face in the House of Commons this fall, I'm joined by Rob Rousseau, Canada correspondent for The Economist magazine, and Shannon Proudfoot, feature writer for the Globe and Mail. Welcome to the House.
Hello there.
So we've heard lots of comments from all sorts of Conservatives about what they'd like to see Pierre Poilievre do when he returns to the House. What can we expect in terms of policy and tone? Rob, I'll start with you.
Well, in terms of policy, nobody is quite sure yet, but he is going to have to try and to begin to incarnate change. He was selling change in the last campaign. He was outflanked on the change front by Mark Carney. In terms of the posture, I would say that there are a lot of Conservatives who believe that he remains one of the most effective political communicators. They would just like to see a little bit more substance, and the word statesmanship comes up a lot. When you look at the numbers, I pay absolutely no attention to voter intention numbers outside of a writ period, but numbers you do pay attention to, or I do anyway, are preferred prime minister. And when you look at those numbers, he trails Mark Carney substantially by 25 points. And that would suggest that there are a lot of Conservatives who still see Mr. Carney as a better prime minister than Pierre Poilievre. And I wrote about this for the magazine this week, and there were a couple of Conservatives who were willing to go on the record to effectively say that. One of them, Regan Watts, said that given the current posture that Mr. Poilievre has, it's almost like he's a fork in a soup world. and if he's going to scoop up some votes, he needs to become a spoon.
One of the arenas in which we've seen Pierre Poilievre have great success was the prosecuting of Justin Trudeau. And of course, some Conservatives would say too much success because Justin Trudeau was gone by the time the campaign actually happened. But can we expect that he's going to have that same success with Mark Carney, particularly after the news that broke on Friday that the Prime Minister does plan to remove retaliatory tariffs on some American goods? And Shannon, this time I'll start with you.
So I think, to me, that is one of the most interesting questions this fall, but I would frame it slightly differently. It's, does Pierre Poilievre start prosecuting Mark Carney, or does he keep prosecuting the ghost of Justin Trudeau? Because so far, like, my very kind of snide, sarcastic way to put it is that someone should just play a supercut of images of Justin Trudeau with Sarah McLachlan singing "I Will Remember You" in the background. And they must do that before he goes out, because it looks like a case of be careful what you wish for. He built the case so effectively of axe the tax and get rid of that Trudeau guy that they threw them both out the window. And then what do you do with yourself? So I think the question is that he has to grasp the reality as it is now and deal with Carney as he is now. And I'm sure Friday's decision will add more fuel to the fire. The idea that, Carney said he could handle this guy. He says he's a big global banker type. He knows CEOs. But it turns out, he rolls over and shows Trump his soft belly when it suits him.
Let's hear a little bit of what Pierre Poilievre did say Friday afternoon.
He promised he would have elbows up. He promised he could, quote, handle Trump, and that he would, quote, negotiate a win. Those are his promises, and he needs to be judged by his word. And this was not any promise, just any old promise on page 73 of his platform. It was the promise on which he ran his entire election campaign. And now he's abandoning it. So either he admits that he was wrong all along, or that he knowingly spread falsehoods to get elected.
So that was Friday afternoon. But earlier this week, Poilievre had a big win in that by-election. His next test is going to be a leadership review in January in Alberta. At this time, are there any real threats to his leadership? Rob?
No, there's nobody who's doing any serious organizing. There are lots of people who are going to be ready in a hurry. Embryonic campaigns will grow muscle and sinew very, very quickly should he stumble between now and then. But nobody's going to challenge him openly. He's going to win, and he's probably going to win substantially. Having the convention in Calgary in January means that a lot of the people who are grumbling about his leadership in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, to a certain extent in Ontario, are not going to be disposed to make the trip to Calgary in January. Look, I think some of the things that we should look for that he hasn't done yet. We should look for him to reach out to Premiers Tim Houston and Doug Ford. He hasn't done it yet. And there's still rancor there. There is still bile there. It's still flowing. And somebody needs to put a cork in that bile and deal with it.
Shannon?
Same. Nobody I've talked to and nothing we've seen in reality suggests he's in serious danger. Although someone I talked to this week on background, so I'll leave it anonymous, pointed out that what he might need to do is recover some of the enthusiasm for his leadership. I mean, he won with a thumping majority 2-3 years ago in the fall and has sort of ridden, a rocket ship that whole time until about 6 or 7 or 8 months ago when Trump changed everything. And they've talked a lot about his being a movement conservatism. And we saw, those massive rallies and the huge enthusiasm and this sense that he had both tapped and sort of breathed life into a public mood that I think the Liberals missed the boat on all last fall, for a year before that he had got where people were. And people were responding accordingly. So it's not a case of him being in serious danger of losing his leadership or losing support, but maybe trying to recover some of that mojo.
One of the things that we've really been thinking about this week as we've been putting this episode together, is the idea that we could potentially be looking at a two-party system in Canada for the foreseeable future. And that is, of course, because the NDP had some pretty major challenges in the last election. They're down to 7 MPs. They don't have party status. So what kind of challenge do you think they will pose in the next sitting of Parliament to the Carney Liberals? Is there any room? We've talked a bit about Mark Carney kind of having a bit of a progressive conservative tint in some ways. I'm wondering if you think there's opportunity there for the NDP. And Rob, we can start with you.
Yeah, the left flank of the Liberal Party is wide open. Mr. Carney has moved the party to the center. And with that, he is, as of yet, not alienated left-wing Liberals or even some New Democrats who scurried to him because of Trump. The specter of Trump remains there, so there's still some cover for Carney. But I think the Air Canada strike was an open opportunity for the New Democrats to actually make some ground. It was interesting to watch Mr. Poilievre come up very, very strongly in favor of the ground crew and flight attendants union. But look, I don't think that the New Democratic Party is going to disappear at the federal level. You've got New Democrats in power in BC, and the most popular premier, I believe, in Canada is the New Democratic premier in Manitoba, Wab Kinew. They are the official opposition in Alberta. They're the official opposition also in Saskatchewan. They're the official opposition in Ontario. So there is grassroots strength there. What there isn't, it seems, is the kind of discussion happening at the federal level of the party that would put them back in the game. I listened to somebody like Brian Topp, who was chief of staff to Jack Layton, the most successful NDP leader in history, saying that the performative wing of the NDP is now in charge, and that if anybody represents a threat to the future of the Democratic Party federally, it's that wing of the party. And so they're the ones to watch if you're going to see New Democrats become extinct at the federal level.
Shannon?
Yeah, I think the problem is we don't know who's in charge, in the sense that there's not even, I don't think at this moment, any declared candidates. The NDP is sort of this amorphous blob. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but it's a very, very tiny caucus rump. And if we believe that leadership is important to a party shaping itself, we don't know what shape that is going to be, particularly because the nature of the NDP and the nature of this moment is such that there's some open lanes of how they could tack and define themselves in the future. And presumably it will be both the party speaking as they choose a leader and that leader deciding to shape the party. But certainly there's some built-in sort of structural challenges for them. When you're talking about labor and the Air Canada strike, we've seen that in this weird realignment of the working class and the overall realignment in Canada, the Conservatives trying to eat that lunch right out from under them. So that poses a risk from a different part of the political spectrum. And then I don't know how much to read into the way NDP voters stampeded to the Liberals in the last election, because there was so much, that election was a walking aberration, right? So much was strange there. I don't know if that suggests a future as a two-party state. I think looking at our neighbors to the south, we should probably not do that. It would be a bad idea, but that's just me. But there was just everything about that election was so strange, and people were just sort of, it was like a video game. Pick your fighter against the big boss at the end. So I think the bigger question of whether the NDP from here is who they choose as their leader and what direction they take, and then how much that's speaking to where Canadians are.
Well, definitely something we'll be watching. If we could briefly return back to the news that broke on Friday on the Canada-US front. Mark Carney said the climb down on tariffs was about kickstarting talks for a new deal between Canada and the United States. And he is arguing that Canada still has the best deal. But we know that this is not the first concession that Canada has made. We can think of the digital services tax. He campaigned on being elbows up. How open are Canadians to a shift in tone on this subject? Shannon?
That is a tricky one because it was elbows up, fight you at center ice during the campaign. I think that was a very domestically focused message, and obviously it hit the sweet spot. You know, Carney's campaign rallies looked like junior hockey games. Like that's who was there. That's how they were showing up. But Trump is a fact of life. Trump is highly erratic. Trump holds all the cards in the world economy, military might, people, all of that. It sort of reminds me of if you ever have someone in your life, like personally or in a work setting or whatever, where say they're irrational, they're unfair, they're all of those bad adjectives, and you can keep fighting against that in your head and expecting them to play by the rules, or you can grasp the reality as it is and play the best cards you have for the game that's in front of you. And I don't mean to be an apologist for Carney, but I think that's where we are as a country now. He's not wrong that we have the best of a series of bad deals from other countries. Nobody else would be wrong to position this as a climb down from the Prime Minister. But then we saw almost immediately after he did it, Trump talked about how much he liked Carney and how he was a good guy. So if we're trying to grease the wheels here, it's not very palatable. It doesn't feel great to put your elbows down and tuck your head and kind of like hustle by the bully in the hallway, but it is what it is. This is the world we live in for at least another 3 years or so. And so I see the tactical sense in it, even if it leaves a bad taste in the mouth nationally.
It's a climb down. It's brisk and inelegant backpedaling is what it is. And it is, as Shannon said, a reality that he may be graceless. He may be bumptious. He may be a ripe orange rectum. We may not like him at all. It does not matter. He's there. He's there for the next 3 years, and we are going to have to deal with him. Just like the Europeans, if they want to defend Europe from Putin and try to preserve some semblance of Ukraine as we know it now, they have to deal with Trump. There is no getting around Trump on security and on Canada's prosperity as well. So we need to deal with him. And we thought we couldn't deal with him. We thought we could walk away from him. But we would not be able to deal with him if we did not confront this notion that he wanted our retaliatory tariffs to come down. He wanted them down. They're coming down. I do expect that there is a small pro to the quid that we've just made, and I expect to see aluminum tariffs that the U.S. has currently on Canada to come down a little bit. But that's not necessarily because of Carney. It's because Detroit is screaming at the Trump administration that the cost of cars is going through the roof and is going to affect a lot of people who buy F-150s.
All right, something to be watching. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure being here.
Shannon Proudfoot of the Globe and Mail and Rob Russo with The Economist. That's it for us today. Next week, our summer specials continue with an in-depth documentary from NATO's border with Russia. As this country looks to strengthen its ties with Europe, what can Canada learn from our two newest NATO allies, Sweden and Finland? Emma Godmere explores what the two Nordic countries know better than anyone about the Russian threat and preparing for the worst. Our crew this week on The House is Emma Godmere and Victoria Volito, and our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. I'm Kate McKenna. Thanks for listening.